The sun filtered softly through the blinds of Magic Johnson's study, casting golden lines across the mahogany desk where a single sheet of paper rested. His fingers hovered above it, trembling ever so slightly, as if the weight of the words he had finally written were too much for even a man like him to bear. For 3 decades he had stood tall against giants, on courts, in boardrooms, and in front of cameras. He had spoken about victories, business, health, and resilience, but never about this. Not to them, not to his children, not in the way that truly mattered. He had always believed actions spoke louder than words, that providing, protecting, and showing up was enough. But lately something had shifted. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the silence that sometimes lingered between the hugs and smiles, or maybe it was the fear that one day he'd leave things unsaid. This letter, penned over nights filled with hesitation, contained truths he'd never voiced. Not about love, but about vulnerability. Not about being proud, but why. And the fear that despite everything, maybe his children didn't fully know how deeply they were seen, how unconditionally they were cherished. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that inspire, move, and connect us all. Magic leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For someone who had once played in front of roaring crowds, he'd never felt this nervous. He thought of EJ, vibrant, expressive, and fearless, of Elisa, quietly strong, deeply intuitive. They were his world, yet there was a part of him he'd always kept hidden, unintentionally creating a quiet space between their hearts. He remembered moments vividly. EJ walking into the living room as a child, wearing heels and a boa, looking up for a reaction. Magic had smiled, said something supportive, but inside, he'd been unsure. Less about EJ, more about himself. Was his love enough? Was he showing it right? He recalled Elisa at 12, writing poems in her journal, eyes always scanning for his approval. She had his heart, but he'd never told her just how deeply she inspired him. He had cheered her wins, protected her from losses, but never said the one thing that lingered on his tongue. You are more than enough, just as you are. It wasn't that he was cold. On the contrary, Magic loved hard, but he had been raised to show strength, not softness. And somewhere along the way, the emotional language his children needed got buried under years of resilience and bravado. Now, with the letter finally written, he knew it was time. He picked up his phone and texted the group chat they used for holidays and birthdays. Family weekend at the beach house, just us, need to talk. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. They would come. They always did. As he folded the letter and slipped it into his leather journal, a strange mix of dread and relief washed over him. The words were no longer trapped inside. But what would happen when they were finally heard? That weekend could change everything or nothing. But at least for the first time he was ready to speak, not as Magic Johnson the legend, but as Irvin, the father. And that made all the difference. There was a time when the word future terrified him. It was November 7th, 1991, the day he stood before the world and announced that he was HIV positive. He remembered the silence that followed, the sea of cameras, and the sting of uncertainty in his wife Cookie's eyes. But deeper than all of that was a private fear. His children. EJ was just a baby. Elisa hadn't even come into their lives yet. Would he live long enough for them to remember his face? That moment reshaped everything. Life became a series of measured steps. Treatments, press conferences, advocacy. Magic transformed fear into purpose, determined not to be defined by his diagnosis. But something else happened too. He began building walls, emotional ones. He told himself that love was presence, that showing up every game, recital, and milestone was what counted. And it did. But over time, vulnerability became something he gave to the public far more easily than to his own family. Now, decades later, those memories returned with sharp clarity. Sitting on the edge of his bed one night, letter already written, Magic thought of all the quiet moments he had missed. Not physically, he had been there, but emotionally, really been there. He thought of EJ's teenage years, the way his son grew into his identity with courage and flair. He remembered every proud moment, every time EJ stood tall in a world that didn't always know what to do with his light. And still, magic had kept a part of himself guarded, supportive but measured, loving but careful. Not because he doubted his son, but because he doubted himself. Could he say the right thing? Would his words land wrong? So he chose silence, believing his presence would fill the gaps. But presence cannot always speak for the heart. And Elisa, his quiet thinker, his anchor, the one who watched everything and felt even more. She never demanded attention, never asked for validation, but Magic knew. He knew there were times she needed to hear that she was powerful in her stillness. That being the quiet strength in the room was not lesser but vital. He had felt it, but he had never said it. The more he reflected, the clearer it became. Love had never been the problem. Expression had. He had lived a life under the spotlight, yet he had hidden the most personal truths in the shadows. Back then, he had told the world he was going to fight. And he did. He beat the odds. But somewhere in that fight, he forgot to unlearn the habits that survival had taught him. Stoicism, control, caution. Now, older, wiser, and still here, he realized that surviving wasn't enough. Connection mattered more. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about truth. He could no longer accept the quiet space between him and his children. He saw how EJ's smile sometimes faltered when conversations got too real. How Elisa hugged him tight but never lingered long. They loved him deeply. But there was something missing, and he finally understood what it was. It was time to break the silence. Not just with words, but with heart. He couldn't rewrite the past, but he could choose this moment. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. He opened his journal again, rereading his letter. It still felt terrifying, but it also felt right. A plan began to form, not for a performance or a lesson, just for a moment. Honest, human, whole. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows of the beach house, carrying the faint scent of salt and eucalyptus. It was early evening, and the sky was painted in hues of lavender and coral. Magic stood on the patio, journal in hand, the letter tucked carefully inside. His heart pounded not with fear but with urgency. This was the moment. He had invited them for a simple family weekend. No announcements, no explanations, just time. That's how he wanted it. When EJ and Elisa arrived, there was laughter, familiarity, and casual affection, the kind that only long-held bonds could carry. But beneath it all, Magic could feel the difference. He wasn't here to just be dad. He was here to be real. Dinner was easy, light, stories flowed, memories shared. Then, as the plates were cleared and the sky dimmed, Magic rose from his seat with a softness that quieted the room. EJ tilted his head, curious. Elisa instinctively reached for her glass of water, sensing the shift. "I wrote something," Magic said, "and I need to read it to you." Neither interrupted. They waited, open-eyed, uncertain but present. Magic opened the journal, unfolded the letter, and breathed in deeply. Then he began. "I don't know if I've ever told you this the way I should have," he read, voice steady. "Not as Magic Johnson, but as your father. As a man who has lived a blessed life and still carries regrets." He paused, eyes flicking up. EJ's expression was unreadable. Elisa's eyes glistened, not with tears yet, but anticipation. "I was scared when you were young, not just because of the disease, but because I didn't know how long I'd be here. So I focused on building, legacy, business, safety. I thought that was how I showed you I loved you. And maybe I did, in part, but I missed something." He kept going, each word clearer than the last. "I missed telling you what I really felt. EJ, I watched you become who you are with courage I never had at your age. You've always been honest about yourself, even when the world wasn't ready. I was proud, yes, but more than that, I was humbled. And sometimes I stayed quiet because I didn't know if I could say it right. But here it is. I love all of you, every part, not despite who you are, because of who you are." EJ's eyes lowered, and he pressed his fingers against his lips, holding back emotion. Magic turned to Elisa, voice softening. Elisa, you've been my still water, my calm. You never asked for center stage, but you've always been the center of my peace. I should have told you how much your quiet strength saved me. You see things others miss. You feel things others avoid. I love you for that, for your heart, for your mind, for everything. A long silence followed. Magic's hand trembled slightly as he closed the journal. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't need applause, just understanding. Just something. Elisa leaned forward first. She reached for his hand without a word, her touch warm and steady. Then EJ stood, walked to his father, and wrapped his arms around him. Magic didn't move for a moment, then melted into the embrace. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In that quiet, with nothing but the waves echoing in the background, something finally opened. A space where silence once lived was now filled with truth, with tears, with love finally spoken. For a long time, no one said anything, not because there was nothing to say, but because the words had to find the right shape. Magic sat between his children, still feeling the warmth of EJ's hug and the steady pressure of Elisa's hand. The letter was folded now, but its impact lingered like a tide that had reshaped the shore. EJ spoke first. His voice wasn't theatrical. It was low, thoughtful, something rare for someone so often luminous in the spotlight. Dad, I used to wonder, he said. I always knew you loved me. I mean, you never made me feel unwanted, but there were times when I wasn't sure if you really saw me, like all of me. You'd smile, but not always engage. Supportive, yeah, but reserved. I'd leave a room wondering if there was something you wanted to say but didn't. He glanced at his father, then offered a small smile. Hearing that tonight, that meant everything. I don't need perfection. I just needed that honesty. Magic nodded, emotion still rising in his throat. He looked to Elisa, whose eyes had been fixed on the table, deep in thought. I always thought I was the easy one, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't ask for much. I didn't challenge you. I just stayed in the background. But sometimes I wondered if that made me invisible. You were proud of EJ's boldness, and you should be. But I wasn't sure if my kind of strength ever stood out to you. She met her father's gaze directly. You saying you saw me? That I gave you peace? That changed something in me. Magic felt his breath catch. These were the conversations he'd never allowed before, not out of lack of love, but fear of fragility. And yet here they were, growing stronger with every vulnerable word. I wish I had said all this sooner, he said. I spent so long thinking I needed to be the pillar, but maybe I was supposed to be softer too. EJ reached across the table, grabbing both his sister's hand and his father's. We're here now, that's what matters, and we're not going backward. For the rest of the night, they talked. Not about the past alone, but about the meanings behind the years, the times they hurt each other by omission, the jokes that masked longing, the silences that weren't peaceful, just unfinished. Magic listened more than he spoke, absorbing truths he hadn't been ready to hear before. They shared childhood memories from different angles. EJ spoke of wearing bright colors in a world that demanded gray. Elisa described writing poems in secret, afraid they wouldn't matter. Magic saw now how much strength it had taken for them to grow into themselves without all the words they needed from him. The conversations didn't erase the years, but they gave them context. They created understanding. A bridge was being built, not from scratch, but from pieces that had always been there, waiting to be assembled with care. As midnight neared, Magic looked at both of them, not as the children he had raised, but as the people they had become, resilient, wise, loving. We start fresh tomorrow, he said. No more holding back. They agreed, not with grand promises, but with something stronger. Presence. This time not just physical, but emotional, complete. For the first time in a long while, Magic didn't feel like a man trying to make up for lost time. He felt like a father stepping into something new. Back in Los Angeles, life resumed. Meetings, schedules, dinners, responsibilities. But something had shifted, not in the routines, but in the rhythm beneath them. There was a different kind of laughter in the house, a deeper resonance to the conversations. It wasn't louder, just fuller. Magic noticed it first in the small things. How EJ would linger longer after a family lunch, not rushing to the next event. How Elisa texted him randomly, not to ask for anything, but just to say she was thinking of him. And how he, without forcing it, started saying more than "I'm proud of you." He said why, he said how, and he said it often. That weekend at the beach house didn't erase decades of unspoken words, but it created something stronger, clarity, a shared understanding. They had all survived their own battles, public ones, private ones, but now they were living more together, not just alongside each other. One evening, over dinner, Magic leaned back in his chair, watching his kids laugh about something he didn't even catch. For once, he didn't feel the pressure to chime in or take control. He just watched. And felt it. The peace he had once thought would come from accomplishments, now quietly blooming from connection. Later that week, he was asked to do an interview, a retrospective about his life, his legacy. The interviewer listed off his achievements one after another: NBA championships, Olympic gold, business ventures, community impact. And then came the final question. What's the most meaningful victory you've ever had? Magic paused, thinking about all the nights under stadium lights, the roars of millions, the awards and honors. But he smiled softly and said, "The night I told my children everything I should have said years ago. That was my real championship." The interviewer blinked, surprised. But Magic didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. There are some wins that don't make headlines but change everything. As the summer wore on, the Johnson family moved through life with a new pulse. They didn't always talk about that weekend, but it lived in their actions, in the way they hugged longer, in how they asked deeper questions, in the absence of the awkward distance that once lingered. One night they gathered in the backyard under a clear sky. EJ looked up and pointed out a constellation, his voice animated. Elisa added a story about ancient myths. Magic listened, then reached for his son's hand and gave Elisa a nod. "You two," he said, his voice full, "are my brightest stars." EJ chuckled, wiping a tear. "You've gotten real poetic lately." Magic laughed too, but there was truth in the warmth behind it. He wasn't just saying things now, he was living them. As they sat together under the stars, no stage, no cameras, no crowd, it was clear. This was the legacy that mattered, a legacy of truth, a legacy of love, finally spoken. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more stories that touch the heart and celebrate the power of real connection. And if you're ready for another emotional journey, click the next video that just appeared on your screen. You won't want to miss it.